Hello and welcome to today's vlog episode, journal entry. I just realized I don't even know what to call these anymore because they're not necessarily like video. I mean, it is a video, but I've kind of been switching over to an audio only format just because it's so much easier to edit them, and I can just hit record on my phone whenever I feel like, a few nuggets of inspiration are dropping in. So, whatever this is, welcome. Um, Anyways, today I wanted to talk about something that happened last week. And I want to say that I tend to have a pretty quick, awareness. Like when something in my world shifts, I tend to notice it relatively quickly. And last week, I got this email from someone who had purchased an item for work. And they were asking when it was going to be shipped. And they were being a little bit demanding, I think is the word I want to use, as to when it needed to be shipped. And it was this vibe, this energy that I didn't necessarily appreciate. And I started to get curious because I'm like, this is interesting because this hasn't happened in a while. And I, again, didn't necessarily love the energy. But then after that message, I got another message from someone else asking when their item was going to be shipped. And they had literally just purchased it. So I did have a moment to myself when I was like, can you give me a minute to, look for the item, package it up, and send it off. I do have anywhere from a 3 to 4 day handling period, because as a projector, having energy that ebbs and flows, I wanted to make sure I had enough of a buffer time, in the event that we get way more orders than what I normally process during the day or during the week. Now that my brother's been helping me more with the more physical aspects of the workload, I am feeling more at ease with being able to handle whatever comes in. But anyways, I don't remember if it was 2 or 3 people kind of one after another asking when their items were going to ship. And if you've listened to other pieces of my content, you know that I always say that patience is not my strongest characteristic quality. I tend to be quite impatient. Now, as I was thinking about how I wanted to talk about this a little bit before I hit record, during the day, I started asking myself, is that true that you're not patient? And there are some instances where I am very patient, like when it comes to children or certain situations, or, there are some instances where I am very patient. And then there are others where I'm not. Now, from an astrological standpoint, I do believe there's something in my chart there that does or show me that it's kind of expected. It's normal for me to not feel very patient or not be very patient. But I kind of okay, when I started getting all these emails of people asking for their items, by the end of the afternoon, I kind of really was starting to sit with it. And I'm okay, I don't like this. What needs to be tweaked, or what is asking to be tweaked, because this isn't common. It doesn't have, not to this degree. So I had a little chat with my brother, and I'm like, you know what? I'm noticing this thing that popped up. A lot of people are, messaging, and they're impatient for their items. So I'm doing my part in looking at what I need to tweak within me. Just, check yourself and see if there's anything that you could tweak within you so that we can work through this and go back to this experience of people are getting their items in a timely manner. Because I even though I have a 3 to 4 day shipping period, we usually get items out way before then, and people get them a lot sooner than they expected. And we do have a lot of feedback on how quickly the items are shipped and they arrive. So as I sat with myself in the afternoon, kind of thinking, okay, where could this be coming from? I got this thing popped in my head of me saying in my content, I tend to not be very patient. I'm not very patient. I don't like being patient. So I'm okay, God, touche. I see what you're doing here. And okay, maybe I'm being asked to contemplate and to learn to be more patient. So after that, I realized, or I remembered that in my Gene Key profile, I do have one of the Gene Keys that the shadow aspect is impatience. And one of the things that I do like about the Gene Keys is how it goes from shadow to gift to city. And it's like a pathway, right? Kind of like a road. And I love reading the material. I don't always resonate with that everything, but I do like reading the material because it does give me ideas on how to play with the energetic so that I can tweak my experience into something that feels more empowering, that feels better, that feels smoother, that feels more fun. So, what I'm going to do in this piece of content is I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the information I highlighted in this gene key. It's the fifth gene key, and a little bit of my contemplations, and how I'm going to be using the information again to shift into getting more comfortable with being patient. So, one of the things that I highlighted in this section was the sentence that says, because the fifth gene key binds all living forms through these universal patterns, at its lower frequencies, it tends to display a deep distrust of life. And this manifests in human beings through the fifth shadow of impatience. And I thought that this was really, really interesting because I find that for most of my life, like the general overall feeling was fear and guilt, which tend to be very low frequencies. And it hasn't been until recently that I've done a lot of work around healing my nervous system and getting to the root of my stuff that it's gotten a lot easier to relax and to really start trusting life, to start trusting that things aren't going to fall apart, that life is taking care of me, that God is taking care of me, and that it is safe to trust the way that things unfold. Okay, so the material continues saying that this gene key is about trusting or not trusting universal rhythm and natural timing. It sets the rhythms of the seasons, it fixes the timing of cell growth and decay in every living creature, and it governs all patterns of animal and human migration. This impatience is one of the greatest causes of disease on our planet, for it will undermine your health and well-being and cut you off from the very heartbeat of life. Then it mentioned something that I thought was really, really interesting. It says that impatience can be viewed by human beings as a positive trait, since it can lead us into action instead of like remaining complacent or not doing anything. But it says that this is a mistaken impression, since impatience is rooted in agitation, and all action arising from agitation is out of harmony with the whole. There's a vast difference between acting out of impatience and acting out of resolve. And I'm like, ooh, this is very interesting. And I find that like when I feel into this, it's very true, because like impatience feels like very choppy, very chaotic, very like could be all over the place. And this kind of goes against with, trusting the universal rhythm or the natural timing that is embedded within life. And this, in order to be able to tap into that timing or that rhythm, it does require a sense of surrender and trust. And I find that, at least in my case, many times these two terms, especially surrender, my mind can interpret that or make that mean like I'm just supposed to sit around and not do anything. And that's not not at all how it has to be. And I love how it worded it, that there's a vast difference between acting out of impatience and acting out of resolve. And then it mentions how when we're feeling impatient, our breathing has become shallow and our nervous system is overactivated. The core feeling is that all is not as it should be. And this is where I start giggling to myself, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like so me. When I start feeling impatient, especially like around work or money or things like that I feel like should be different, that's when the impatience, like I really feel it kick in, and it's like this energy of like, what do I do? What do I do? I need to do something about this. And if I'm really honest with myself, acting out of that state is acting out of agitation and not from like resolve. I get this visual or this energy of like it's strong, but it's steady and it's powerful. It's not chaotic, it's not scattered, it's focused and precise. Now from here, Rudd makes another very interesting statement. He says, everything is always exactly as it should be. What has happened is that you have fallen out of your natural state, the state of trust. And I had to sit with this for a couple of minutes, because when I think back to like when life got really chaotic and like what I perceived like a lot of bad things started happening, I kind of thought that all those bad things that happened were things that were supposed to happen, but kind of taking what the sentence says that we've fallen out of the natural state, the state of trust, I kind of look back and I can see more clearly how, especially during that time, I was much more distrustful of life than I normally was. And like when I say, like, I've had a lot of trust issues, I can't, like, there are no words to express the high amounts of distrust that I've had in life, which is really sad. But now that I'm thinking about it this way, I'm like, oh my gosh, I see what I could have done differently back then. But it's like, okay, we can't change the past. How can we use this information to, kind of like embody it and have it click at a cellular level so that I can take the lessons and, start doing things differently. But thinking back to that time, it was a time where I was really, really so far away from this natural state, this state of trust. And it makes sense why so many things went wrong because of how far off, how far away I was from my natural state. Now, the next thing it mentions is that impatience is always rooted in the mind, and as such is unique to human beings because of the unusual nature of our neocortex, which processes information in such a way that we perceive everything as happening in time, with a past, a present, and a future. The only way to escape impatience is to escape the mind and its realm of time, which is precisely what happens at the higher frequencies of this gene key. Now, the gene keys come in pairs, so the pair to the fifth gene key is the 35th gene key, and the shadow of that gene key is hunger. And it says that these two states literally feed on each other. The hunger to escape the feeling of insecurity leads to impatience and vice versa, and it is all driven by the fear of time running out. Then it mentions how we have forgotten that life itself sets the pattern of evolution, and that we are merely the agents of those patterns. From time to time, both in our personal lives and at a collective level, natural mutations occur when the stability of life is overturned. If you can enter deeply into the spirit of such times, you will come to realize that nothing is really out of balance and that all will reveal itself in time. And this is where patience comes in, and this is something that I'm really starting to lean more into, especially as a line 6. I do have a lot of line 6 in my profile, and line 6, one of the keynotes of line 6 is needing to have a lot of patience because of the trajectory that the line 6 has to move through in life in order to gain all this wisdom and be able to really embody it and use it in a way that only time can allow for. Okay, then later on it mentions how as each glitch is observed, it is deleted, and as each fear is accepted, it diminishes. And a little after that, it says, like all the shadows, it is simply a matter of perception and attitude. Time always moves according to your perception or mood. If your breathing is calm, rhythmical, and deep, then time appears to dissolve. At the highest frequencies of this fifth gene key, you do not even notice time. The more you become aware of your own impatience and restlessness, the deeper you begin to sink into your true center, and the less you are concerned with time and timing. This is the birth of a higher frequency, and that frequency is what we call patience. The fifth gene key contains the most beautiful of equations. Acceptance equals patience, because the deeper you enter into your fears, the more patient you become. And this is so interesting because I have noticed that when I've been able to pause long enough and by pausing, it's like I'm able to take a step back from the energy of impatience. It's kind of like, okay, hold on, let me feel into what's really going on here. It's like reaching a deeper level of acceptance. And many times what I find is it's not so much the impatience. Impatience is like a byproduct or the result of the fear that's underneath that. So by taking a step back and kind of asking myself, okay, why am I impatient? Many times it's because, let's say if I'm wanting to manifest a certain amount of money, it can be I don't know if to describe it so subtle or something that I've normalized so much that I really have to pause and take a step back and feel into the situation differently, and then or observe the feeling, I guess is another way of looking at it, than allowing myself to get carried away by the feeling. But let's say when I'm talking in terms of money, I've been wanting to manifest a certain amount, there there is this fear of like, if it doesn't manifest today, or if I don't hit that goal today, that means that I'm not going to hit the amount that I wanted to manifest by the end of the month. There's impatience because I fear that it's not going to happen. So by starting to create more awareness around this and accepting the fear, it's like, okay, this is what I feel. Let me feel it fully. Let me allow it to move through me, which doesn't end up taking that long. Like when I pause and allow that fear to be processed, it doesn't take as long. And then it's kind of like, okay, it kind of resets everything, and I'm able to tap into the patience again. So the repressive nature of this gene key is pessimistic. When impatience drives a person to give up on life, it manifests as pessimism. And pessimism, which we're having a really hard time saying right now, is nothing but the vestige of a complete loss of rhythm in one's life. The fear there has to do with that nothing can or ever will get better. And it pulls us into a downward spiral, feeding on itself over and over until it finally ends in crisis or some kind of psychological and or nervous collapse. Now here, like this next piece, these are the parts that I don't necessarily agree with. One thing that I do say a lot, and I kind of feel like it hasn't been asking for me like to not say it that way, is that you just have to know something's a thing so that you know what to do about it. Here Red says that if a person has been swept into pessimism, there's nothing proactive they can do to break free. As their friend or an observer, you must trust that life will create a crisis for them, because eventually it will. Only such a breakdown or breakthrough has enough energy to snap them out of their pattern. And I don't know, this is where I disagree. I feel like, I don't know, it feels like you have to let people suffer. And I'm not saying that, like, if I see someone kind of, or like myself, because like with myself, I find that I do tend to have a lot of self-awareness. I do catch things relatively quickly, and there are some things that have taken more time, but I do find that the things that have taken more time, like, it's also for a reason. It's kind of like I needed to go through that process in order to be able to learn something and be able to like share it with others so that they don't have to go through that long process. So I don't know how I feel about the statement. Part of me wants to say like I don't necessarily believe it's true, but then, you know, after reading this information of like how life has its own rhythm and timing, then by me thinking or feeling that way, it kind of disrupts the rhythm. And I could also be overthinking it, so we're just going to move along to the reactive nature, which manifests as pushy. Now, this is an anger-based version of pessimism, and so that pushy people are constantly trying to force life's flow. They push others around, becoming touchy and aggravated, and can suddenly lash out for no apparent reason. They also tend to manifest very inharmonious situations where natural timing is out of synchronization and nothing seems easy, as though life were deliberately blocking one's path. Even so, these kinds of natures stubbornly push on, making the situation worse and worse until something or someone has to snap in order to release the pressure. You can see how resistance to the natural patterns of life eventually brings one to a turning point, both in the repressed or reactive natures. At such turning points, the only decision is really, do I want to begin living again? Whatever a person decides, it must be respected as part of the wider pattern of life. And this is interesting because, like, as I'm reading this, I think back to like my grief journey, especially with Mom when she passed away. I don't know, there's a part of me that wants to say that that journey could have been shorter if I had, one, like the tools to be able to navigate that better, and also the right type of support. So I don't know, I'm kind of torn between like how I would like to express myself in that way, because, you know, here it says whatever a person decides, it must be respected as a part of the wider pattern of life. And when I think of like seeing someone, like if I had a me back then, like 5 years ago when Mom passed away, that knew what I know now, part of me feels that I couldn't help say something to that me of the past, but without the pressure or the expectation that it was going to help them in any way. And I don't know if I'm doing this justice, because okay, I'm thinking of like how I want to express this, because I have heard people say that you just got to honor each person's journey, and part of me has a lot of resistance to that, because I get like this visual or this thought pattern, I don't even know what to call it, of like people have to suffer in order to learn the lesson. But at least from my experience, like along my journey, there have been people along my journey that have said something that has kind of like snapped me out of what I was perceiving or experiencing or feeling. And as I'm talking about this, I wonder if people are also, part of this wider pattern of life that can help others snap out of it. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a crisis or things like that. So I don't know, that's where I'm at right now, and I accept that. I'm going to trust that it, right, for now, like, that's okay, because I do notice the shift of like there's more of an acceptance of honoring everyone's timing. And at the same time, I am also very intentional, like when I have sessions with someone and I can see maybe a little bit further than what they're ready for. Like I really do feel into the situation, but I do so without like pressuring them or like needing them to see what I see. So it's this very interesting combination of like honoring where they're at and also offering like little pieces that will kind of like open their awareness to a different possibility without the pressure, without taking them out of their path in a negative way. It's and it could I mean, okay, it has a lot to do with my own personal design. I do find that I have a lot of mutation keynotes, and maybe this is why I have a lot of resistance to the information being presented this way, because I have seen in certain situations where either just by being in my presence or me saying something that might seem relatively insignificant compared to like how much deeper I can go, the person does experience like a quantum leap or a shift in their awareness, a shift in their consciousness. And okay, I'm just going to pause there for now, and I'm going to see, how this shifts as I continue to create more awareness and more patience and interacting with more people, connecting with more people, having more sessions with people, and see how like that shifts. And I will probably talk about this more sometime in the future. Okay, now let's talk about the gift. I remember when I first read this section, like this very first sentence, which says the antidote to impatience is patience. I was like, why? Why? Like, why can't it be something different? Because that's how much resistance I've had to this concept of patience. And then it says, the ironic thing about patience, though, is that it takes patience to learn patience. And I'm like, okay. Let me keep reading. Let me see what else I can get from this. But okay, it says, the more patient you become, the more you learn that patience always pays off, and thus the easier and more natural it becomes to wait. However, patience is not the same thing as waiting. You can wait both patiently or impatiently. Patience is a natural ground of your being, whereas impatience arises out of the fear and conditioning. Patience is about trust. So reading it this way, like it being presented this way, I'm like, okay, I'm starting to see like the benefit or the value of being patient. And I think before I used to see as like patience doesn't pay off. But here what it says is that it always pays off. So, affirmation that I am starting to use a lot more is patience always pays off. Patience always pays off. Again, to remind myself and help me shift out of this pattern of impatience. And the more I am able to see that patience does indeed pay off, the easier it becomes and the more natural it becomes to be more patient. And I love how it mentions here that patience is not the same thing as waiting, because like I mentioned before, I felt like in the past, if like me thinking of patience, I kind of imagined myself just sitting on the couch waiting, not really doing anything. But it says here that it's not about waiting, because we can either wait patiently or impatiently. And again, it brings up this point of like impatience arises out of the fear and conditioning. So I've been looking into like what's the fear or what's the conditioning telling me. Now, when he's talking about patience is about trust, but he says something really interesting here. He says that if you trust in life, you will trust life in every moment, even the challenging moments. And in doing so, you will always remain in the flow. And this is so interesting because I do see a pattern of like when I haven't trusted life, it's kind of like I stop, everything gets interrupted and things stop flowing. So this is another thing that I've really been working on creating more awareness around and reminding myself that even when the moments feel challenging, the key is to lean in even deeper into trusting life so that I remain in flow instead of resistance or stagnation or all of these other states that are going to prolong the process and or create much more suffering for myself than need be. Okay, then it says that as you live your life, you may notice many rhythms all around you, and it is the underlying presence of these rhythms that makes you feel stable. The most obvious annual rhythm can be seen in the shifting of the 4 seasons. If you are inwardly quiet, the passage of the seasons will make a very powerful impression within your psyche. It tells us some very deep truths, that spring always follows winter, for example. In your daily life, you will experience periods of winter where resources may be scarce, where you may feel lost for a while, or when you simply feel melancholy for no apparent reason. Such stages are built into life, and if you are patient, they change of their own accord, and they always reveal some magic. So here, like what I got from this is like in those moments that I'm feeling impatient, again, pausing long enough to not allow the impatience to carry me away, and also asking myself, okay, what's the fear and or conditioning, and then observing the rhythms that are around me. And it's kind of like what it's felt like for me, or what it's looked like for me recently, is like tuning into the energy of the day, sitting outside and watching nature, watching the trees, observing the animals, the birds. Right now, I've been noticing like a lot of butterflies, and tapping into that rhythm. And there's this really deep peace that I feel when I've done this in moments of just observing nature and seeing how much trust nature has to have. That it's like butterflies aren't worrying, like they're just literally flying. They don't look worried, they don't feel worried. So I'm like, okay, there's a lot I can learn from, nature and animals and trees and flowers and all these beautiful things. So this is one practice that I personally have been doing a little bit more regularly, observing the natural rhythms that are around me and allowing those to help me feel more stable. Okay, then later on it talks about how through the magnetism of your living aura, you draw in or limit the frequencies of light deep into the cellular structures of your body. If you live your life out of fear, magnetically speaking, you limit the amount of light that touches your DNA. The more open-hearted you are, the more you magnetize higher frequencies into that very same DNA. It is only at certain frequencies that particular codes can be activated. When you are in love, for example, you will always experience higher codes within your DNA awakening. Time will pass differently, almost as if you were in a timeless bubble. Anyone who has been in love can recognize or remember this kind of experience. So, again, this is another piece that I am creating more awareness around, how the more open-hearted I am, the more magnetic I am, the more light is able to touch my DNA, and the more of a pleasant experience, the more in flow with life that I'm going to be. Okay, now this next sentence is something that I definitely have been noticing a lot, especially recently, especially because I do feel like like I mentioned earlier, I'm shifting into like a deeper sense of trust and surrender. But it says the more you're able to settle into a deep trust and patience with the rhythm of your own life, the more your heart will open and the softer and more yielding you will become in your attitude to everything and everyone that comes your way. And I really do notice this in like my interactions with other people. I'm much more patient, but I'm also like that patience allows for more space for me to be able to observe their good qualities and not be so hard on them. And when I was able to like work through my root issue, like what I was the really big trigger that I was experiencing, because I had heard several times people make this comment of like, you're very hard on yourself. And I knew that I was very hard on myself, but I hadn't quite gotten to the root of where that came from. So when I was able to get to the root of that, it was almost like, well, it was exactly like me giving that inner child part of me what they needed to hear that permission to not be so hard on themselves, that it was okay for them to be like, to show themselves more grace. And in turn, by like my inner child accepting accepting that grace, I noticed how much more grace I extended to the people in my life, or the people that I came across in my everyday life. Okay, now the information continues saying, you will begin to discover a higher functioning of your DNA, a code within a code. This code is not dependent on anything or anyone outside of you. The state of open-heartedness or of being in love is a completely natural human state. There are people in the world who live permanently in this state, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that would be amazing to live in that state. And I kind of got this visual of like what Abraham Hicks describes like as the vortex. Essentially, that's how you could potentially stay in the vortex for longer periods of time until you're able to master like being in the vortex all the time, which I want to say is possible, since here it says, there are people in the world who live permanently in that state. Okay, then it says the gifts that come to the patient person are not only inner quietness, but also integration. When you wait and allow life to reveal its natural rhythms, you also come to realize that life knows best. And boy, this is something that I have been realizing a lot recently, how like there's really nothing to worry about. It's just dropping the conditioning and dropping the fears around that life, or the beliefs too, that life doesn't want the best for you. So yeah, that's been like super, super interesting. Okay, this is a little bit longer than I thought it would be, so I'm not going to go into the city one because I don't think I've given myself time to contemplate it. But one thing I will say about the city is that the word that was used is timelessness. And when I was originally like looking into this like patience thing, and I still had a lot of resistance around patience, I kind of like didn't focus so much on the word patience. I kind of like skipped over it momentarily and felt into this word timelessness. I'm like, ooh, I think I really like that word, timelessness. Like, what does that feel like? And it feels like very peaceful, very still, like completely different from like impatience. And the way to get to timelessness is through this pathway, this road of patience. But because I had a lot of resistance, so I'm like, okay, let me just contemplate timelessness, just the energy of that word. What does that feel like? And to me, it felt like very elegant, very still. Like I think of something classic, or like this timeless piece of art, or I don't know, something, again, very elegant, very refined, very unique, exquisite, peaceful, solid. So if you are someone like me who is starting to get comfortable with patience and seeing the value in patience, maybe you could start by contemplating this word timelessness and feeling into it. Just seeing, like, when I think about it, this word, it's just, I feel like my entire, like, the rhythm just kind of slows down a lot. And it's almost like it's easier for me to step into my feminine, or the state of being, which is another piece that I've really been playing with recently. And I find like I'm kind of feeling like all of these, what's the word? All of these pieces, let's go with pieces, are really helping me decondition my G center a lot more, which, excuse me, as a self-projected projector, I find that not only did I have a lot of conditioning, a lot of stuff to clean up in the G center, but also like the G center is a very, very important part of my chart. It's the center of my authority. So, okay, I think I'm going to pause here for now. If you guys want to share any takeaways that you got from this, or any personal experiences or stories on patience, impatience, trusting life, or the rhythms, or whatever it is that you want to share, I invite you to leave your comments down below. I always enjoy reading them, and I do my best to reply to them. And if you'd like to follow along on my journey, I'm going to invite you to find me on Instagram. My handle is @Ginie Salcedo. There on my website, you can find more information on different ways of working with me. Okay, that's it for this one. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you later.